Okay, participants are joining. We are gonna wait for just 2 more minutes and then we are gonna start the session. Okay, it's 6:45, so let's start it. First of all, I would like to thank our sponsors, Walters Publication and Mediox, for sponsoring this webinar and bringing to us such an esteemed speaker. I would also like to thank all of the participants for joining us for the final time on this 3 day conference. From 3 days, we have been together going through all these workshops and webinars, and now we have come to the final webinar. But we are going to go out with a bang with a topic like bioterrorism. I would like to introduce Dr. Mayank, and he will introduce us to our esteemed speaker. Dr. Mayank, over to you.
Thank you so much, Muskan. It's an honor to be the part of this event. And I would on behalf of Wolters Kluwer, I would like to thank to you people and as well as Dr. Bhalwar for taking this task in such a short span of time. So, like Dr. Bhalwar has lot of books in his name, lot of research paper, as you have seen in the brochure which we have designed. Now, without wasting any time, I would request Dr. Bhalwar to start the session so that we can have a very interactive session at the end with question and answers. So, Dr. Bhalwar, I would like to welcome you and to start this session.
I hope I am audible.
Audible.
Can we share the screen now?
Yes, sir.
So, ladies and gentlemen, and boys and girls, I believe a lot of the audience would be young people. Terrorism is not a very tasty word, especially when you are heading for a dinner. But then it's a fact of life now. It's a fact of life now. I remember almost when I started my medical education. That was the word terrorism was simply unheard of. But as of now, the things have diagonally changed. Terrorism has become an everyday usage word. And with it, and with that, disasters form a very important knowledge person in today's world. So what we'll do is we'll start today's discussion on bioterrorism with some very few basic definitions which are important to understand. To start with, what a disaster is. A disaster has been agendas by the government of India as the occurrence disrupting the normal conditions a level of suffering that exceeds the capacity of adjustment of the affected community. So what happens is when do we call it a disaster? The entire response capacity of a community or a population is overwhelmed. They can't, and therefore help coming from outside. That is the point we say a disaster has. And to continue, a biological disaster is a disaster, naturally, biological agents. That biological agent could be a virus or bacteria or other biological agents, or it could be their toxin. Now, this can occur either due to a natural process. It could be a course, a natural course. Just a minute. Sorry for the disruption. A natural, or else it could be by accident. A virus will leak out from a laboratory. Is it could be a deliberate action, and when it becomes a deliberate action, we call it as bioterrorism. Terrorism, this word, not a very good word to hear, but then it is there and is defined as the unlawful use the United States chemical weapons attack. But one that scares me to death is biological weapons. Social disaster that a biological weapon can create. And why it is important? It is important for certain reasons.
Sorry for interruption, sir, but the slides are not changing, and students are requesting to put it on full presentation.
Full presentation. Just 1 minute.
Yes, sir. Sure.
So what I'll do is I'll quickly run the slides for the benefit of students. Probably they were not shared. The definition of a disaster, a biological disaster, the weapons of mass destruction as those which are either chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear in nature, or CBRN. And lastly, warfare terrorism. Also said about the importance of bioterrorism in the Powell, who was the top man of the United States Armed Forces. Military could defend the United States against a chemical, but the one that scares me to death is a biological weapon. Are you seeing the screen, Muskan, now?
Yes, sir. I can see the screen, but the slide.
It's very difficult for it to survive this virus to become a bioterrorist. Then we should have about this agent a database of prior research and development. See, bio not come all of a sudden. It's not there to pick up an agent and it's a agent. Very gradual research in which the variants are developed in a laboratory, so that must have been there on that agent. And that agent should finally have a weaponized. Every agent cannot be weaponized. And what we mean by that is agent, a bioterrorism weapon should have three components. The first component should have agent, which should have the characteristics that I just enumerated. It could be a virus or a bacteria or a toxin. The second thing is there should be process. by which we can process that agent, and also additives can be added so that it can be stabilized. The agent is stabilized in a form that it can be stored and used and transported for further use. And finally, we should have a delivery system. Now, this delivery system could be the spraying of aircrafts delivered or through animals, or it could be simply injection given. And the worst part, it could be a suicidal human being agent. The usual modes of delivery, there we come to that now. The most common mode of delivery of bioterrorism, the agents which are used for it. Muskan, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. We can perfectly hear you.
And the slides are changing and you're comfortable with it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Perfect.
So the commonest mode of delivery of these weapons which are used for bioterrorism are the aerosols. And aerosols are important because they have a very widespread reach capacity for the weaponization. The aerosols can range from a handheld, something what you use as a deodorant spray, starting for that which could be used for a very limited amount of gathering, to as large that it could be sprayed by aircraft and spread over a wide area of population. After this, inanimate articles can also become an agency for conveyance of these agents. And the interesting case in question would be the anthrax letters. Somewhere in the beginning of this century, we had the letters which were sent to politicians in the United States, and about 22 of the important persons were affected. 5 of them died because those envelopes were suffused with anthrax spores. So that is another way. Then it could be contamination of water or food supplies, and commonly used agents to this mode would be salmonellosis and other toxins. Not very common for a mass scale bioterrorism. Dead bodies are sometimes used. Historically, they have been used in the Battle of Kaffa, almost about 700 years back, somewhere in Ukraine. The soldiers had put the dead bodies of people who had died of plague on the ramparts of the fort so as to scare the enemies. So that is one mode. Even dead animals, if they are carrying the infectious agent, can also transmit the agent to the human population. And the most disturbing element, if this happens, it is going to be very, very difficult. We have been commonly hearing of suicide bombers and suicide attackers, and we commonly hear of those people who drive a vehicle laden with explosives onto another convoy. So they are all very highly motivated suicidal people who have been trained and motivated to have a suicide attack. Now, God forbid if something of this thing can happen. Theoretically, it can. If such a motivated person is infected with a biological agent which can be transmitted from human to human, and these persons, just a few of them, find their way into a population which is naive, which is not protected, which is susceptible, then these few people can transmit this infection or biological agent to a substantial amount of people. And then what happens is, if the human to human transmission starts, then it will become a chain reaction, and the chain will be very difficult to break. So till now, such cases have not been recorded. But theoretically, we must now be aware, we must keep ourselves aware about these happenings also. A potential does exist. Now, CDC Atlanta has classified the agents of bioterrorism into 3 categories: category A, B, and C, depending on their importance. Category A, it has got the highest priority agents, and these agents possess a very significant risk to public health and also to the individual security of the individual nations. The characteristics are of this category that they are easily transmitted from person to person. They carry very high mortality rates. They have a very high potential for creating major public health impact, panic, and social disruption. And they require very special action for preparing ourselves beforehand from the public health point of view. The agents which are included in this category include those which cause anthrax, the one which causes plague, the agent of smallpox, tularemia, Ebola, and botulism. So these are the agents which are in this category and are very, very serious to be dealt with. Category B consists of second highest priority agents. They are also a definite risk to public health and the national security. Their characteristics are that they are moderately easy to disseminate. They result in moderate morbidity and low mortality rates as compared to category A agents, and they require specific enhancements in the diagnostic capacity and for the disease surveillance. Now, what are the agents included? These are the ones. They include the agents which causes brucellosis, which causes psittacosis, the causative agent of Q fever, that of epidemic typhus, glandus and melioidosis. Then there are certain food and water safety threats, particularly salmonellosis, and certain toxins, particularly the ricin, which have been classified under category B. And finally, we have category C, which consists of the third priority agents, and they also include the emerging pathogens. The characteristics of this group agents is the ease of production and dissemination, that they have potential for creating high mortality and morbidity, and they also have a potential for creating major public health impact, panic and social disruption. The agents which are included in this category are the Nipah virus, the hantavirus, SARS coronavirus, not the one which we are facing now, but this is the 2003 SARS virus. Then the other influenza viruses, and we really don't know at present, but the potential exists theoretically of SARS COVID-19. The characteristics of group A, because they are very, very important. There are 6 of them, and the important characteristics are: the anthrax is a bacteria. The minimum dose it needs is 8,000 spores, but these 8,000 spores is not very large quantity. A very small, a little sprinkling into an envelope which contain enough amount of spores. Its incubation period, to recapitulate, incubation period is the time period which you take between the entry of the agent into the body, into the human body, till the time when the first sign or symptom appears. So the incubation is between 1 to 6 days. The initial symptoms are flu-like, and some of them initially would manifest as full-blown pneumonia. The illness lasts for 3 to 5 days and carries a very, very high mortality of 90%. The plague is the bacteria. About 100 organisms are the minimum. So it's a very small infective dose. It carries 2 to 3 days of incubation, very short incubation. This also the pneumonic variety. Plague actually has got 3 varieties, but what we are talking of is the pneumonic variety, which can be used for bioterrorism. The initial symptoms are like flu-like or pneumonia. The illness would last for 1 to 6 days, and again carries a very, very high mortality of almost 100%. Tularemia is caused by bacteria, very small amount of organisms. You can see that incubation period is also small, 3 to 5 days on an average. Also presents with flu-like symptoms. Duration is 2 weeks or more. The lethality is not so high, between 5 to 30%. The smallpox has been eradicated. The virus is now preserved only in 2 laboratories in the world, one in USA and one in Russia. A virus which again carries a very, very small infective dose, an incubation of average 12 days. It starts with flu-like symptoms and goes on to severe respiratory symptoms and eruptions on the body. The illness lasts for almost 4 weeks. The mortality again is high. In the usual variety, it's about 30%, but in case you have the flat type or the hemorrhagic type of smallpox, the mortality is as high as 80%. Then Ebola and Marburg are the new emerging viruses. Very small infective dose, even 1 to 2 organisms are enough to create an infection. An incubation period, which is 4 to 21 days, which is an ideal setting for a bioterrorism agent. Again, flu-like symptoms. Duration is 7 to 16 days and very, very high mortality. In fact, Ebola carries a mortality of almost 90%. The botulinum is a toxin produced by Clostridium botulinum. A very small dose of 100 nanogram is enough to create the disease. A small incubation period of up to 5 days. It basically presents as muscle weakness. Illness lasts for 24 to 72 hours. Mortality with treatment, even with treatment, would be high, almost 30%. So we'll appreciate that most of these group A organisms, at least the first 5 of them, are actually all transmitted by the respiratory route. They are all inhalation agents. Now, the features of outbreak which will occur due to intentional or accidental use of biological agent would be very peculiar. First of all, it would be a very highly unusual event. And all of a sudden, you will have a large number of casualties in terms of mortality or morbidity. The mortality or morbidity would be much, much more than you normally expect during those times or at that place. The disease presentation would be something of an uncommon, which is not usually seen in that area. Usually, it will be a point source outbreak. By point source outbreak, we mean that it will be carried by a common vehicle. The epidemic curve will rise suddenly. It will go on and attain a peak, a sharp peak, and then it will fall down very quickly. Or else, if the source is perpetuating for some time, then it will rise slowly, but again reach a peak, which will be more like a flat peak and then fall down gradually. On the other hand, in case it is being transmitted from human to human, then it will have a different form. It will have a form which, if you remember, is something like a propagated epidemic, because then it is a very long drawn and it's a very irregular sort of curve, goes up very irregularly with bumps and again comes down very slowly with bumps all over the curve. We may have multiple epidemics when such type of bioterrorist attacks occur. And what is interesting is that those individuals who are protected, in case they have been protected by a prior vaccination for that disease, or let's say military person who habitually use protective equipment like masks or respirators at certain areas, the attack rates will be very less in those individuals. Also, the features would include that you will find dead animals. For example, in the case of plague, you will find dead rodents. Another interesting feature is the reverse spread. Normally what happens is most of these infections which are used as bioterrorist agents are actually originally zoonoses. They are infections of animals which can be transmitted to human beings. And normally the infections occur first in the animals and then they are spread on to human beings. But in the reverse spread, which will happen most probably in a bioterrorist attack, the infections will first happen in a human being and then you will find infections happening in the animals. So that is what we mean by the reverse spread. Unusual disease manifestation. Let's say anthrax. If anthrax is there, an epidemic, then about just 5 to 10% of the cases we expect to be of pneumonic type or the respiratory anthrax, inhalation anthrax. But in a bioterrorist attack, almost 80 to 90% of the cases would be of inhalation variety. Another interesting feature in a bioterrorist attack will be a downwind pattern. Now, what we mean by downwind is that if there is a wind flowing from one geographical area down, you will find that this epidemic occur at an area where the agent has been released, and then it will move on to that area where the downwind direction is there towards which the wind is flowing. So that is what we mean by downwind pattern. And also some direct evidence will come up by way of investigative agencies, like those agencies which are intelligence agencies. They also give some indication that a bioterrorist attack has occurred. So these are the specific features of a bioterrorist attack. A question which has often been asked is this: can coronavirus, which we are all facing, it's a big problem, can it be a man-made bioweapon? Now, as far as this question is concerned, as on today, the body of the present knowledge, there has been present plenty of speculation and mystery about this question. The SARS-CoV-2 is actually so new that still the scientists do not really have very hard evidence and corroboratory research to accept this statement or to dismiss this. As far as the coronaviruses are concerned, historically, we know that they are capable of causing severe outbreaks in humans. It happens in form of SARS in 2003 and MERS in 2012. The present evidence, if we summarize it, it indicates that at present there is no substantive or conclusive evidence that any genetic engineering has been done. And the mutations that seem to have happened in this virus, they seem to be consistent with a natural evolution. And the intermediate host from which this spillover has occurred to the human beings, we are still not very clear. Could be bats, could be pangolins. We will need from the WHO who were to conduct an investigation and from other reputed agencies. Irrespective of this question, the fact which is there is this: we are very certain that even if this is a natural infection which has occurred by nature, this outbreak has impacted the lives of billions of people over the globe. It has affected us very seriously as a direct medical hazard. Millions have been affected by now, and very soon, probably a million deaths may be recorded. And more importantly, very indirectly, it has affected as an adversary for the global economy. And therefore, this particular virus can be, we have to keep in mind, whatever it is at present, but it can become a very effective model for future terrorist activities. And it could be a new model for circumventing the conventions of modern warfare. In a modern warfare, an enemy who is inclined to use this sort of agents may actually avoid, rather than fighting conventional war, the enemy could unleash this sort of virus, which then by human-to-human transmission become a big problem than fighting a war. So we as public health professionals, as doctors and medical people, we need to very aware now. Our surveillance has to be up. Our public health procedures have to be very meticulous from now onwards. Now, let us go quickly to prevention, control and management of these bioterrorism activities. The stages, there are basically 3 stages of a bioterrorist attack. There is a pre-event phase before the attack occurs, and that is the phase where we should undertake full preparedness. Then we have the actual event phase in which we respond based on the preparedness. And this event phase again has 3 sub-phases. The first one is the acute or the build-up phase, in which we mount a rapid response, quick response, try to bring it down. Then we have the peak phase, the epidemic goes up and we mount a comprehensive response. And finally, the epidemic starts declining. We have the declining phase, and wherein we mount the recovery response. And thereafter, after event phase, we have the post-event phase in which we undertake the mitigation work, the rehabilitation of the affected populations, and we revisit our preparedness to refine our procedures. Now, actions during the pre-event preparedness. During the pre-event, as I said, the keyword is preparedness, and there are 3 actions to be taken. The first action is to develop the standard protocols, the SOPs, stockpile our supplies of vaccines, of drugs, of medical equipment, develop the facilities and the laws for the anticipated bioterrorist event. The second one is surveillance, which is either laboratory surveillance or environmental or syndromic surveillance, and the international steps. So let us see quickly one by one. During the preparedness stage, we have to develop SOPs, facilities, we have to stockpile for firstly the laboratory testing facilities. We have to earmark the isolation facilities, which will have the isolation and the quarantine facilities and the standard operating procedures. We have to develop treatment protocols well in advance of any anticipated attack. We must identify very clearly in every area where are the healthcare establishments or the hospitals, and how we will be moving our patients from the affected areas to these specialized hospitals. We have to plan well before about the movement of the equipment and drugs. Constitute response teams, what we call as the RRTs, and the quick reaction teams, what we call as the QRTs, and they're about our readiness to move at a short notice. That is what we call as the mobilization plans for the personnel, the medical personnel, and the drugs. Identify the, for example, the Indian or the and the administration. And also very important, the strategic national stockpiles, what we call as SNS. We have to plan out all we are our these important the sea and how them in. Now, surveillance has got 3 aspects, is extremely important. First part is the laboratory surveillance, which includes the routine reporting of the disease surveillance. What we have in our country, a very well developed and very well established IDSP program. We need to identify the specialized laboratories which will be required in case of any bioterrorist attack, and we have to enhance the lab capabilities in terms of safety, in terms of equipment. And as new agents we are foreseeing, we must start building up the capacity to undertake laboratory tests and to undertake laboratory surveillance for these diseases. The environmental surveillance includes environmental monitoring for the various biological agents, collecting the samples from the environment, mainly from the air and water, giving early warning of the presence of a biological agent. And there are fixed particular monitoring stations on which these samples are collected, and whenever there is an increased detection of these agents, to be given, and this has to be followed by investigations and a very prompt public health response very immediately in terms of for the agent, and also by testing and isolation of the and quarantine if required. Another very important aspect of surveillance is the syndromic surveillance, which is undertaken for identifying the unusual due to covert biological attack. And what we do is we collect the data from the cases with defined within it. In fact, we have got to develop these definitions beforehand of the syndrome. Some of the definitions which are there, which are being used, are a syndrome of ARDS with fever could be caused by inhalation anthrax or pneumonic plague or staph interauxin B. A syndrome of acute rash and fever could be due to smallpox or viral hemorrhagic fevers. Like a syndrome of neurological syndrome, signs and symptoms could be due to botulism, and influenza-like illness could be due to brucellosis, tularemia, and mycotoxins. So this is how we have got to develop the case definitions, and we have to be prepared with these case definitions for surveillance. The international steps are also very, very important. It means exchange of information regarding the newly emerging and the re-emerging infectious diseases, the occurrence of unusual diseases in any country, the biological development programs and intelligence about this program of particularly the rogue countries, the assistance in developing laboratory diagnostic and research capabilities among the countries, and assistance in developing treatment facilities. It also would require development and signing of international laws and treaties. Then international pressure has to be brought on the rogue nations to dismantle their bioterrorism programs. It has happened earlier also. Some of the nations pressurized their bioterrorism. And also it involves keeping a strict control on the concerned. The research is going on. We have laboratories, and in number of laboratories, in good faith, a virus engineered in an effort to understand the risk it may possess to public health. But the same virus can be misused in wrong intentions, and this can be done either accidentally or it could be deliberate by terrorists. Therefore, this becomes a very international cooperation. The event phase is divided into three subphases. In first subphase, we have the acute build-up phase. This followed by the peak phase and the declining phase. In the acute build-up phase, the actions to be taken in one sentence would mean we identify the sparks and stamp out the fire. This is what is done. Quickly identify it, and just when I like you identify initial fire and then put your stamp, put your foot on it. So that is what is to be done in the initial phase. Technically, it means meticulous surveillance and containment. This is the key word. The surveillance and containment in these times, it will include the success would greatly depend on the efficacy of the early warning, and this is developed by the already existing surveillance. If we have a good surveillance system, the early warning comes very fast. Our RRT and the QRTs would move quickly in the suspected areas, and we have to equip them, not to forget, equip them with proper PPE, rapid clinical case definitions, as we have already discussed, or the laboratory testing is employed, whatever laboratory testing facilities we have in this time. A line listing of the affected or suspected persons is done. Those people who have been identified with symptoms, signs, or laboratory positive, a line list is developed. And then we start chemoprophylaxis of the frontline workers and the high-risk groups, if it is applicable. If we have a chemoprophylaxis, the affected area and the population based on the line listing is very clearly defined. And once it is defined, this affected population and area has to be absolutely very meticulously contained. That is what we call as containment strategy. The cases are to be isolated and treated, and the contacts need to be tracked, tested, and quarantined. The reports from the different affected areas should flow and should be collated and analyzed at the district level, by the state level, and at the national level. The diagnostic and treatment facilities are quickly shifted to the affected areas in this build-up phase. We start the population health education for personal protection, And we also start efforts to develop or obtain either a specific vaccine or immunoglobulins. We are not able to contain it in the acute this phase. We move on to the peak phase, and what we need to do in the peak phase is, first of all, full-fledged patient management protocols are to be implemented, which we would have developed already in the preparedness phase. We need to have enhanced case definitions and shifting to the treatment facility once the cases are identified by case definitions or by the laboratory testing. The focus at this stage now shifts to preventing the mortality. We further refine and make available the diagnostic facilities. We make available the drugs and medical equipment at all the places where the patients are coming. A house search is ideally carried out for cases, and cases identified are isolated at home or in the hospital. The steps to effort, we step up the efforts to obtain the vaccine or protective immunoglobulin preparations to the extent possible. We enforce personal protective measures by the population at risk, simple measures like masks in case of droplet infections. A decontamination of agency. If the agency is air or the water by which transmission is going on, a decontamination drive is taken now. We enhance the population health education steps, start the vaccination of high-risk groups if the vaccine is available, and ensure adequate and a complete supply of personal protective equipment for the high-risk workers. We enhance the international cooperation efforts. Then we move on to the declining phase. Once again, we step the surveillance. Now, surveillance and containment becomes very important in the initial phase when it's going up and again when it's declining. This again is to find out any remnant case and treat him or isolate him. Isolation and protocol-wise treatment of cases and testing, tracking, and quarantine of contacts. And also, if the vaccine is available, we start coverage of the general population in this phase. We continue with the chemoprophylaxis of frontline workers and high-risk groups. We identify the pockets where transmission is still going on. We test that population in these pockets. We isolate and treat the cases and track, test, and quarantine their contacts. We start the vaccination of population at large, and we undertake random surveys to check for population. And post-event, once the main event is over, we carry out mop-up of any remaining pockets of transmission by testing, tracking, isolation, quarantine, and treatment, random surveys to check for population immunity. We undertake vaccination of groups or communities where immunity levels are still low, provided we have a vaccine. We identify the drawbacks and the lessons we have learned during the event phase, and thereafter we revise the SOPs and the protocols in view of our failures or the lessons we have learned. To conclude, friends, public health actually has got various definitions, but a very simple definition of public health is that it is the application of the time-tested, simple, common sense procedures to the population at large. Now, when we talk of bioterrorism, we would realize that most of the bioterrorism acts use agents which enter the human body by the respiratory route. And out of these, the most hazardous will be the ones which are capable of human-to-human transmission, because then they will start a chain. And therefore, preparedness is extremely important. Visualizing the problem that this may occur, that can occur, to be prepared, develop the protocols and SOP, the issue of early warnings through surveillance, and enforcement of the following very simple, very simple actions in the population would go a very long way in prevention, because most of them are respiratory route infections. Simple use of masks would go a long way in preventing these type of hand hygiene and distancing. These are the three keywords we are still using now in the corona times. And these are the three things which can be used during any respiratory route bioterrorist agent as a very simple but very effective procedure. Before I end, I must put on record my acknowledgement, my deep acknowledgement and thanks to Air Commodore Renuka Kunte, the Professor and Head of Community Medicine, Brigadier Saurav Sen, Professor and Head of Microbiology, and Colonel Rajesh Sahu, in fact, my student, now Professor of Department of Community Medicine at the Armed Forces Medical College, for their very valuable professional support. I put certain further suggested readings here in the presentation with you. So this audience can go through that. And with that, thank you very much. And I thank the organizers for calling me here, giving me a chance, and to the audience in particular for listening to me through a topic which is actually very boring, but then the topic is important in modern times. Thank you very much. Any questions? I would try my best.
Some questions in the Q&A section on the screen, please. Read them up.
The first question suspected by weapon, I've already covered it up. Probably it could be one of the things. As on today, the what I would say conclusive evidence, scientific evidence, been an act of bioterrorism. Done the nearest genetic mapping also shows a wide variation, and it is not possible and has worked on it. Agencies are still investigating it. Let us wait for the report. Also, there are certain aspects which do not favor. For example, particular survival in nature. And for any terrorist agency to use a bioterrorist weapon, try to use an agent which has got a very good survival in nature. Anthrax, plague, smallpox are classical examples. Because this really can't survive at all, I would say. For practical purposes, it doesn't from one man to another woman or man. Within a few hours. So that goes against the concept of bioterrorism. And of course, the scientific evidence which is there is not very much in favor. We have to wait and watch. It is not towards this side that it was probably a bioterrorist attack. It seems it was a natural spillover. Human hand was not involved in its engineering. It seems to be spillover from an intermediate host, which probably was a bat or a pangolin, and that the infected human beings moved on around the world at a time when nobody suspected it and spread it. Is what is meant by high mortality and morbidity. Now, mortality parameters on which we measure from epidemiology point of view, infectiousness, infectivity, pathogenicity, and virulence of an organism. Now, in organism is the ability to infect others, how much it can infect the other people who are susceptible, and in epidemiology, secondary attack rate. And that is measured in a family group. If the people in the family are susceptible, one person brings the, then in the maximum period of, now we know that the maximum transmission occurs within about 14 days, let's say, approximately after. Now, if the transmission happens in 14 days and one person gets it to the family, so 9 others, and out of these 9, 8 people are infected 14 days, then the secondary attack rate is 8 upon 9. So it comes to about 90%. The measure of infectivity of an organism. The second measure is the morbidity, what we call as pathogenicity. That is the percentage of serious cases that are caused. Wide spectrum, which starts with very, very mild cases, even asymptomatic cases, and then moves on to sick, people who are critical, people who are very, very sick. Last point is on the spectrum is mortality, which is measured by the CFR, the case fatality ratio, measured by the number of people who have died out of those who were. So let's say rabies. If 100 people are infected, all 100 will die. That's the statistics. So rabies is 100%. It carries a very high mortality. Okay. On the other hand, viral hepatitis. People are infected, probably 1 or 2 will die ultimately. I'm talking about the mortality, CFR is low, the mortality is not very high, but the morbidity is high. A large spectrum of people would be infected. So high mortality and high morbidity, I hope I have answered. If there is further query, please feel free to ask. In the meantime, I'll go on. You have your special happening, dengue happens, and dengue has a very natural process. So epidemics occur, surge occurs, it comes down. The second thing is it is there in a laboratory. It is being processed, it is being researched or genetically engineered in laboratory, or it is just being stored. A leakage from there can happen accidentally by sheer negligence, like smallpox virus is there in two of the laboratories. If somebody is really negligent, I'm sure they won't be, it can leak out. Or it could be deliberately introduced. The difference between these two is actually very difficult. But the main point of differentiation will be that in case it is an accidental leak, then the area first of all to be affected will be around, geographically around a facility which is known to be dealing with bioagents. It won't happen that a facility is here where I am sitting. If we have a facility, we have a BSL-3 or BSL-4 laboratory here and we are researching on certain agents. So if a leakage has happened here, then the leakage, it's very improbable that the symptoms, the cases will start occurring in Lucknow. No, they will first of all occur here only. And then they'll spread over. So it will like a centrifugal spread from the center outside. On the other hand, a deliberate bioterrorist attack will generally not happen in that area where a facility is there, because a terrorist who is working on these things, probably developing a weapon, is not going to use it on his or her own population. So we have to have knowledge. The intelligence agencies have knowledge where all research on biological agents is going on. So this is one way we can differentiate. The next question is whether all the countries are ready to face the known bioterrorism threat. If yes, how? Not by no. Not really prepared. Because as I said, facing bioterrorism needs two or three things. At one end are countries which have actually faced terrorism. Now, once you face a disease, once you face a threat, once you face an unfortunate event, you know what it means. And therefore, you are much more motivated as a country to develop your plans to face it. In this regard, I'm happy that our country, though we had the misfortune of facing terrorism, for the past almost about 40 years, we have been facing terrorism. But the good thing it has given us is, it has given us the resolve and it has given us the capabilities to face it. So we have developed our SOPs. We have a huge, beautifully organized system. We have the NDMA, which came up almost 20 years back, the National Disaster Management Authority. We have our protocols in place. We have got very nice lab. We have got, to the best of my knowledge, I think we have 2 or 3 BSL-4 laboratories in the country, which is US has 8. So all these are good preparations. But then there are countries which are actually developing countries, they don't have the finances and they have not faced these threats. Now, those are the countries they have to work hard. But what it becomes very important is to, at this point of time, the question which you have asked, the important aspect is what I touched last of all was the international cooperation. International cooperation has to be built up to share the knowledge, because many countries know what is happening where, what are the threats and how we can respond to it. That sharing of knowledge and mutual cooperation will be very, very important on an international level to deal with these diseases. I hope I have answered this question. The last one is, sir, if a country is proved to do bioterrorism, taking away lives of, so you mean to say what should we do with it? There is a treaty, there is an international treaty which puts a ban on bioterrorism activities and development of biological agents for the purpose of decimating or bringing misery to the human population. There's an international treaty which has been signed by a lot of countries, including India. But the only lacuna in this treaty is that it does not force an inspection. And it is not signed by many countries, and many countries still are taking it very lightly. So truly speaking, as a country, I don't think we can do much to take any legal action on a country which is doing it. But yes, what we can do is we can certainly bring international pressure. See, if a country is not doing the right thing, the best thing to do is to bring about international pressure, because most of the countries who have suffered from bioterrorism are also very well motivated. They are developed countries, they have suffered bioterrorism, and therefore they are well motivated to stop these acts of bioterrorism. So that is the answer to your question from my side. Any other question if you have? What is a rogue country? Rogue country is a country which is known, to either harbor or directly or indirectly encourage the training, the lodgement, and the import of terrorist activities. That is how we define a rogue country. Now, don't ask me who is a rogue country because there is no official version for that. But a rogue country is like a rogue person. A rogue person is one who troubles others, who keeps guns in his house, who keeps acid bottles in his house. He's a rogue person. So similarly, you have the rogue countries. And our country has got, unfortunately, we have been facing a lot of terrorism. So we all should be very well aware, and we should all be ready to face the threat. And then again, there are two things, as I said, preparedness on a national level and down till the individual level. Each one of us, you and me, have to think about it, and we have to be prepared. And the second thing is the international collaboration. Can there is a biot? Okay, more. Thank you. I'm grateful for your nice comments. Are there any criteria for the standard operating procedures? Are different procedures which are made for different aspects. A standard operating procedure could be a procedure which is made for transshipment, for storage and transshipment of, let's say, your diagnostic facilities. Let's say if you have to develop a PCR facility for a particular disease which is likely to come up, then where do we keep our facilities? Where do we keep our, let's say, where do we keep our TrueNet machines? Where do we keep our the SIM cards? How they will be transported? Who will be the people who will be handling it? How they will be trained? So standard operating procedures are developed for different categories of actions. Even in a hospital, if you're working in a hospital, you have a standard operating procedure for different things. You have a standard operating procedure for disinfecting your OT. So that is the SOP. So there cannot be any single answer to this. A standard operating procedure is a guideline which is written down, which is developed by experts. It is then ratified by the administrators. It is ratified by another series of experts. It is then signed by the administrator, the person who is authorized to administer that establishment. In your case, in the hospital, let's say the dean of the institution or the medical superintendent of the institution will sign it. This is the operative procedure, and everybody is bound to follow it. That's what we mean by SOP. What is India's preparation for? We are well prepared. We have faced threats, and we are well prepared. The only thing is that beyond this statement, these are sensitive issues. So it should suffice, and you should be satisfied to know that yes, we are well prepared. We have got a system in place. We have got an organization in place, and we have got capabilities also. And we have got a very strong democracy, a very caring government, and a very strong military to support these activities. But yes, it's a process, it's an ongoing process, and we have to keep on developing ourselves. We are well prepared, but we cannot be complacent. As the biological weapon, no government in modern times has officially used it. Unofficially, I can't comment. There have been anecdotes, but I can't comment whether government has used it officially.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt, but we are a little time bound. I'm really sorry.
I hope I have been able to answer your questions. If there are any, then please feel free. I've got given my website address over there. If anybody wants to put any question, please feel free to give on an email to me or put it on my website, and I'll be very happy to answer your questions.
Sure, sir. Dr. Mayank, would you like to say something, please?
Thanks, Muskan. Like, just one word, it's wow. Like, I'm really thankful from the bottom of my heart, like, for taking such a eye-opener session. And trust me, I lost a track of time while listening. And Muskan, I'm not a doctor. Being a non-medico, I'm proudly saying that I am able to understand whatever Dr. Bhalwar has expressed, because everything has been explained in such a easy slides and lucid language. So thank you so much, sir, for taking such a interactive session. So, Muskan, I would like you can put up your comments and then we can.
Sure, sure. Prerna, would you like to put the vote of thanks, please?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Muskan. And whatever Mr. Mayank said, all were absolutely correct. And what an interesting session it was. And it has been an honor, sir, that we have you here with us. And we are very fortunate that we got to learn all these about bioterrorism from you. And I'm sure that all the participants have been feeling the same after attending your session. Thank you, sir, for such a wonderful session. And we would also like to thank our sponsors, Walter Publications and Mediox, for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you, sir. Thank you so
So
much.
from my side also, thank you very much. And rather than saying a good evening or good night, I would use my pet phrase and Jai Hind. So Jai Hind to all of you and God bless you.
Jai Hind, sir.
Jai Hind, sir.
So guys, this was the last webinar of our conference. And you will be getting the certificates in the WhatsApp group. So stay tuned.